Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to April's Network Tech Talk. It is great seeing everyone this afternoon. For those of you who have not attended in the past, Central Maine Tech Night is a monthly event where founders and leaders share advice on how they overcame challenges, capitalized on their target market, and developed their product, providing you with actionable insight for your own products and processes. For more information, you can find us on Facebook or online at centralmaine.org under our Tech Night tab. I would like to thank our sponsors for this afternoon's conversation. This free event is presented by Central Maine Growth Council and is sponsored by CGI, Thomas College's Harold Alfon Institute for Business Innovation, Valley Beverage, and Bricks Co-working and Innovation Space. In addition, I'd like to say hello to folks that are watching remotely or at home from their office. This Tech Talk is being streamed live and will be available for later viewing on our YouTube channel. So this afternoon's April Tech Talk is Friday, doing your best work from anywhere with Luke Thomas, the founder of Friday. In this Network Tech Talk, Luke will discuss how Friday is providing teams and executives with the tools to stay in sync and do their best work from anywhere. So for those not familiar with Friday, Friday is a Portland, Maine-based tech startup that builds communication software for distributed teams and promises a better way for teams to share their work and stay connected.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm really excited to be here. It's just as the pandemic hopefully winds to a close at some point in the near future, many of us have been working from home. And, for some of us, we've been doing it for a while, but for a lot of us, it's somewhat new even now. There's just this really interesting discussion that's happening around, do we go back to the office? Do we go back to the office a couple days a week? Do we embrace remote completely? These are all some questions like people are trying to figure out. And so I'll share my screen here in a minute. But I wanted to give you a little bit of background on Friday and like why I'm even working on it. I'll kind of weave together like my story and, how I came about working on this. And then we'll get into in here. Let me just share my screen so I can give you something visual to look at. Let me just let's go into presentation mode. General overview is I'm going to give you a history and some background. I'm also then going to provide some tips and advice based on, the years of working remotely and what we see across our customers and what we've learned from the market. So my hope is at the end of this call, not only do you have a better understanding of Friday the company and our history, but also how some actionable takeaways that you can use to be more productive when you're working with people who are not all in the same location. And then finally I'll walk you through the product and how exactly it works, and how it might be able to help you. So just a little bit of about our history. I grew up in the Bangor area. Specifically, I grew up in this little town called LaGrange, which, for those unaware, if you know of like Old Town and Milo, it's adjacent town, about 900 people or so, and one stop sign, no stoplights. So pretty small town upbringing. And my dad worked at General Electric in Bangor. So a lot of the time, I remember growing up, I had a wonderful family, but one of the things that I always remember distinctly about my upbringing was, we spent a lot of time on the road, traveling into town for, events, but also, my dad went to work every day and he would leave at, 6:10, 6:15 in the morning, and he would arrive, 4:20 in the afternoon. And he spent probably upwards of an hour and a half, well, probably about an hour and a half every day commuting to his quote unquote the office, right? And I always thought, wow, wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to drive as much? That would mean he could leave a little later, he could be home a little earlier. Fortunately for me, like when he was home, they were always very engaged. But the reality of the situation is you're spending a meaningful amount of your life on the road. And so, I remember drawing from that experience, just thinking, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice? And so in high school, I started getting in and building websites. I went to a vocational technical school in Bangor called UTC. The reason why I got into building websites was because at the time I wanted to customize my MySpace profile. And I learned that if you change, they're called hex colors, you can change your background. So I saw my brother doing that one day and I thought, wow, that looks cool. And then I went and toured United Technology Center, really enjoyed the teacher there, and I fell into doing web design, just more out of happenstance. So I learned web design and started building websites for local businesses. And what I kind of instantly learned was they wanted a website, sure, but what they really wanted was a way to grow their business. And the website was a means to an end. So then ended up getting involved in digital marketing and how do you acquire customers online and all this fun stuff. So I just became very interested in technology. Ended up teaching myself how to code, not very well, but enough. Um, I went to Maine for college, graduated, and the minute that I graduated, my wife and I moved to Boston because that's where all the tech jobs were. We knew that Boston was only a temporary home. And once again, wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to live in Boston and I could, keep the job but move and live where I wanted to? It just seemed crazy to me at the time where, I was walking around with a laptop. I was doing my work from a laptop. Sure, I would have meetings with my coworkers and all of that, but like if I'm doing my work behind a screen and that screen can move, why can't I just like take that screen to other places and work from anywhere, And so this was back in about 2013. I became very interested with, what people were talking about is, hey, like, why can't you work remotely? Why can't you work remotely? And it was at the time a very nascent trend. There were a few people talking about it, but it seemed really compelling to me at the time because, well, I didn't want to live in Boston. Sitting on the T every day, squashed with a bunch of people who are all not excited about sitting on the T and going to work, there was a natural, like, why don't we just leave? And so in 2015, that's what we did. My wife and I moved back to the Portland area. She also could work remotely at the time, and I was working remotely for a company based in Nashville, Tennessee. And so, the whole time I'm working remotely and it's going pretty well, but there were some very obvious problems and things that I thought could be better. On one hand, I just loved how um, it created this potential foundation for a more flexible workplace. So not only could I live where I wanted, i.e., Maine, but there's also this idea of, well, if you're doing the work, if you're getting your things done, why can't you work when you're most productive? So for me, I really love working in the morning. Why can't I, get up and get some of my work done before my kids wake up? Why can't I work when I'm most productive and maybe finish up a little bit earlier in the afternoon because that's when I'm useless anyway? In theory, it's good for me as the employee, but it's also good for the business because they're able to tap into when I'm most productive. Well, I kind of saw this, but at the same time, the minute people go remote, the minute they start working remotely, you feel disconnected. Before you were in the office, and it was easy to feel like you knew what was going on because you were just learning through osmosis. You're kind of observing. You're able to bump into your coworkers. The office provided this central ground, and I'll get into this more later. Kind of the basic history of the office, um, but I just saw these pains that I thought could be better solved. And so, yeah, the basic idea is I just started building software to help. And originally, it's based around the idea of how can we improve communication between an employee and their manager. But over time, it morphed into something much more comprehensive, almost like an all-in-one platform of sorts, which once again I'll get into later. Um, but yeah, I was working on that on the side, nights and weekends. Started acquiring more and more customers. There's a customer from South Africa now, using the product. There's a customer from Australia using the product. And it kind of grew enough so that I decided, I really need to jump into this full time or I need to shut it down. And I was supporting customers, and they really liked the tool, so shutting it down didn't make sense. But I knew that I had to jump in. So this was back in summer 2019. Call it what, 2 years ago at this point. Decided, well, if I really want to take this to the next level, I need to find some financial resources and some financial capital to really accelerate our roadmap and the vision. And so at the time, I had taken out I had worked with Maine Technology Institute. Fortunately, was able to get a little bit of seed money to help build out the product. Um, but yeah, I decided, I needed to take this to the next level. So we ended up raising a what's called a pre-seed round of investment, which is essentially your first financing event, where investors who think, well, hey, there's potential to grow this business to something big and interesting. Maybe it goes public, maybe it's sold to a big company, or maybe it becomes enormously profitable and we are able to make some money off the profit. Um, so an investor, we had a Boston-based investor and some angels, both in Maine and elsewhere. We raised about $450,000, which gave us, some limited, it gave us enough time to figure things out a little bit more. So this was in, call it October 2019. I was able to start hiring people, and lo and behold, end of February, beginning of March, COVID hits and the world goes into lockdown. So naturally, as you might imagine, um, remote work tools became a lot more interesting. To give you some context, before the pandemic, approximately 3.5% of the U.S. workforce was working full time remote, according to some U.S. Census data. Now, what we're seeing, at least in the surveys, seem to indicate that somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30% want to work full time remote. Then you have about, call it 55, 60% want a hybrid environment, where maybe they go into the office 1, 2 days a week and then they work remotely the rest of the time. Then you have a small cohort of people who just wants to go back to the office full time. The idea of working from home sounds miserable. They just want to go back to the office full time. So the market has certainly changed in a big way. Um, in many ways, I guess I could kind of see the writing on the wall, was because you have this cohort before the pandemic of people who are working remotely, and most of them love the idea of flexibility and they want the freedom to be able to work from where they want. And so naturally, as you might imagine, with more people becoming acclimated to this way of work, more people want to do it. This is not to say that remote work is perfect. There are challenges. We'll get into those more. But it's certainly the idea of having a more flexible work environment that better integrates work and life. It's a pretty easy sell. So, so that being said, that's kind of the history of the company. The one thing I forgot is that we ended up raising a seed round in October of 2020. So call it a year after our first financing event. It was led by Bessemer. A little bit about them. They're essentially the oldest venture capital firm in the country. They were started by the Rockefellers. And yeah, we're just continuing to build the product, continuing to find new customers. But we're used by companies like Twitter, Red Hat, trying to think of some other ones, LinkedIn, some teams there are using it. So we've been able to attract a good group of early adopters, but we certainly have bigger plans. And as a company, there's about 10 of us, mixture full and part-time. I'd say a little over 50% of the company is based here in Maine. The rest of the team is in Nashville and elsewhere. And yeah, we're just really spending most of our time working on product and learning and trying to better solve the pain that you experience when you work from anywhere.
Luke, if you feel comfortable, what was the size of the seed round or the Series A there?
Yeah, so the seed round was 2.1 million. So the capital we've raised to date is about 2.5.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yep. So that gives us a decent amount of runway to be able to really double down and invest in building out, the best product we can build, but also to find, amazing customers who understand the vision and where they, need to take their company. Um, so yeah, the one other quick thing I'll mention is that in the market, what we see, and maybe this is something you all experience, is that if we look at the companies that have been doing this for a while, they have embraced the idea of a more flexible work environment. But the companies are trying to figure out how to get there. They're trying to figure out how to replicate what the high performing, fully distributed, or work from anywhere companies are doing. And there's this gap that needs to be solved. So I'm going to get into the next phase, which is less about our history, less about our background, and more about like here is like the shift that's happening, and here are ways that you can help bridge this gap that I talk about. Um, Before that, does anybody have any questions or things they're curious about the company in particular? If not, I will move on to the next section. Cool. Yeah, so I'm going to try to summarize pretty quickly a lot of the lessons that I've learned working from anywhere, and also why it matters and how you can go about being more productive when working from home or working from some location that you deem interesting or important. So, like, I already got into this, but yeah, this is kind of the quick learnings. Like, we're going to talk about the history of the office, which I think is absolutely fascinating. We're going to talk about what's changing. We're going to talk about some key principles and building blocks, and then we're going to dive into the tools and how Friday specifically helps. I'll show you some product screenshots and stuff. So this is absolutely, I think this is one of the more intriguing things. If you think about the idea of the office for all of us, pretty much it's been it's a fact of life, right? It's something we grew up with. It's something we're used to. It's something many of us have been doing for decades. But the office is actually not that old. Um, and so the history of the office is absolutely fascinating. It starts with ancient Rome, where they would essentially have a place to transact some work and store documents. Think of it almost like a big library. In the early 1700s, between ancient Rome and the early 1700s, there would be monks at monasteries who would have dedicated places that they would work. But where the office really started, the idea of the office really started to take off, was in the early 1700s. Um, and it was the East India Bay Company in the UK. So I pulled a quote from some of their material, which is pretty interesting. Essentially, the idea is they created the office as a way of overseeing people. So what is just really funny, honestly, is for people who their day required thinking and doing what I'd call deep work, right? Deep thought, strategic work, setting the tone, setting the vision, the stuff that you would imagine an executive or a team leader doing. They would create separate rooms for working, right? Imagine the individual office. And the idea was they wanted to make sure that they weren't interrupted. But for the more mechanical, think like factory floor type environment, they would have the clerks all in the same room because they needed to supervise them. So essentially, imagine the office in the 1700s, they would have one wing for the people where they would need to do that deep work. But for everyone else, they'd pack them in like sardines. And so what's really kind of fascinating is that the office started to take off from that point on, and it was a mechanism for overseeing. It was a mechanism for leaders to make sure that people were working because the work being done resembled that of a factory floor. And what's really interesting is the work has changed, but the way that we work and the places that we work really haven't. So if you fast forward to the pre-pandemic workplace, especially for those who work in tech, this is a photo of Facebook's HQ. They're still packed in like sardines. They're packed into an open office, which was very, very prevalent, very, very popular. where I worked in Boston, and for just about every company with an office that I've ever seen, they pack them in like sardines because it was cheaper. Uh, the idea was, well, if we have an open office floor plan, we will see higher levels of collaboration. It will be easier to bump into people. And the cost of coordination will be lower. Well, inevitably, what happens is exactly what happened with the East India Bay Company. For the people doing deeper work, it was incredibly distracting. So I remember, when I worked at an office in Boston, I would have to put on headphones because there was so much noise that I couldn't get things done. So I'd, have a nice pair of noise canceling headphones. I'd put them on, and I would try to zone out when I could find the chance. Because it was easy to coordinate, we gravitated towards communicating in real time. Meetings were cheaper because you could roll around in your desk or in your chair. You could walk up to people and ask them what they were working on. You could pull them into conference rooms. And so naturally what happens is you value presence. Because once again, if you're the manager, if you're the leader, what way do you have of ensuring that people are working? But ideally you're grading them, so to speak, by their output. But what ends up happening is you end up grading them based on the amount of time that they're spending sitting in front of their computer, in front of their desk. Similarly to how the East India Bay Company functioned back in the 1700s. So for 300, 400 years, the 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 way the idea of the office really was pretty it didn't really change. It didn't really change much. But the way that we work became more and more. It was less of the factory floor. It was more of, encountering all these different challenges and needing to think and needing to be able to focus and think. So the work, once again, the work changed, but the way that we go about, the environment did not. And so what happened was when the pandemic hit, it really brought this to light. People are forced to work from home. Executives are a little nervous about it, but they don't have a choice. And so all of a sudden, they need to start thinking about things a little differently. They're nervous. People are working from home, and for a lot of organizations, at least the ones that are talking, uh, the work's still getting done, but people kind of feel disconnected. And so the way I like to describe the shift, before it was like, the office was like high school. Hey, we need to make sure you're here in the office. We need to make sure you're here at school. You can't leave. We don't trust you yet. But then the pandemic forced people to think, and the shift that's happening is it's almost like we're going to college, where you meet up when the time makes sense, right? Because meeting up in person and hanging out in person still matters. But then you go back to your home, you go back to where you want, and you do that deep focused work. And so this is the shift that's happening, and this is the shift that Friday is really trying to tap into, is this idea that the way we work has changed. We need to think of the office as a tool in our toolbox that accomplishes a specific task at hand. So this is what I kind of refer to as like task environment fit. And so the idea is that there is a time to go back to your home and work from home. And there's a time where maybe you should meet up in person. And so the question then becomes, well, when should you do that? So I'm going to introduce two phrases that are very technical in nature, but they're actually pretty simple. There's this idea of asynchronous communication, and there's this idea of synchronous communication. Let me just jump ahead and make sure. Yeah. Asynchronous communication is the idea that you can communicate with someone else in a way that does not require constant presence. So if you've ever sent an email, you've communicated asynchronously because you could send that email and they can read it and reply in a time and in a place that it makes sense for them. So with this mode of communication, I'm just going to move this really quick. There are certain pros and there are certain cons. The pro is that you can revise your message for clarity. So if you've ever used the backspace button to revise your email before sending because you're nervous how someone might interpret it, you have revised a message for clarity. You also can respond at a later time, which means that this form of communication is more flexible in nature. Additionally, it's automatically saved, so it can be referenced later. The cons are that Sorry, I just have a Zoom thing over where I'm trying to refer to. Um, the cons are that it can be easy to be misunderstood. It also lacks a human, a human feel, right? If someone's ever sent you an email and you're just scratching your head, like, feel like they're being mean. That is one of the cons. And so misunderstanding can compound. Imagine that back and forth email or message in Microsoft Teams where you're not on the same page, and all of a sudden the snowball has built and you are upset with a coworker. So once again, think of asynchronous communication as like it's like a tool in your toolbox. The next is synchronous communication. This is the real world meetings. This is the Zoom calls, like what we're on right now. The pro of this format is that it's easier to establish common ground to get on the same page. So, for example, I asked, hey, does anybody have any questions a few minutes ago? The idea there is that if someone is confused about something that I said, it's a chance to clarify, it's a chance to establish common ground. What helps is when you have two people present, there's a natural feedback loop that accelerates and helps people get on the same page. Additionally, because I can, instead of just being text-based, I can read body language. I can understand tone, intonation, things of that nature. And so it helps accelerate relationship building. And this is especially true when you're hanging out in the office, because you can kind of just learn so much through osmosis. The con is that it can't be revised, right? So imagine you accidentally say something in person that you totally didn't mean. Well, that's what happens when you can't revise your message for clarity. You have to think about what you're going to say first. It also can't be reviewed later unless you record it. So I know this conversation is being recorded, so it can be reviewed later. So once again, think of these as these are tools in your toolbox. And so what happens is the longer, if you're really trying to accelerate this transition that's happening right now, where, the idea of working from anywhere, what you have to get really, really good at is picking the right communication channel for the job at hand. Because if you spent most of your day communicating, well, then you need to get good at picking the right tool. Because if you pick the wrong one, or if you pick one that's not ideal, you will burn a lot of cycles. And you won't get on the same page and you'll feel disconnected. And so here's what's happened. And I'm going to skim over this to get to the other things. The basic idea is that there's a shift that happens. Before, when you're in the office, most of your communication happens in real time due to the environment that you're in. And so the office is all about that in-person collaboration, meeting up, hanging out, getting to know people. And that's fine. But what happens is when you're remote, it's essentially the exact opposite. And so what needs to happen essentially is you have remote workers on one hand. They spend most of their day communicating in an asynchronous or written format, or in at least the fully distributed ones do. And then you have people that are used to the office and they're communicating mostly, let's have a Zoom call every 10 minutes. Let's use workplace chat all the time. And as a result, it's like, I can't get anything done. It's like you're taking the office and you're trying to replicate it online. And so what happens is we need to find a middle ground. And the only way that we can find a middle ground here is if we learn how to pick the right tool for the job at hand. Right? And so it's less about saying we need to be in meetings all day. It's less about we need to use written communication all day. It's about saying, how can we shift some of the stuff that we were doing in meetings so that it happens asynchronously or in a written format so that we can accelerate relationship building and we can use our meetings for what they're best for, which is, collaborating, building better relationships, etc. So yeah, this is just to summarize. This is essentially what happens is in the office, you're communicating most of the time in a real-time way. And you're communicating a small percentage in a way that is my time, which is asynchronous. As a remote team, it's almost the exact opposite. And so this is the shift. This is the most important thing after years doing this that you need to really learn, is that it's about picking the right tool for the job at hand. And so what that looks like is that here's a basic framework. If you are relaying facts and information, if you are sharing a status update, if you are collaborating with someone that you know pretty well, you could probably default to using written communication because the probability that you will be misunderstood is low. And also, you already know the person. So they are able to kind of fill in the gaps. When you write an email, they know, oh, Sabrina writes short emails. That's something I can expect. And on the flip side, you should default to a synchronous conversation, i.e. a meeting or a Zoom call, when you need to remove a blocker, when you need to collaborate with coworkers, where it's critical that you get on the same page, or where you're just trying to hang out and get to know people. And so just to reiterate, there's two variables you need to think about. How well do I know the person? And what is the potential that I will be misunderstood? If you know the person, but the potential that being misunderstood is high, you should probably have a meeting. If the potential to be misunderstood is low and you know the person, you could probably do it in writing. So once again, this is the most important thing, that if you want to be successful in this quote unquote new way of working, this is the most important thing that dictates everything else. There was an author back in the 80s or the 70s, I think he wrote a book called The Medium is the Message. The basic idea is the channel that you use produces, in many ways, the outcome. It's less about what you say, it's more about the channel that you use. And I think that's a critical thing to keep in mind when you're working from anywhere. So, any questions so far before I jump into like very specific quick tips?
I have one for you really quickly, Luke. I love, the dichotomy between the synchronous and the asynchronous communication that you've touched upon. Is there anything that you can elaborate within Friday that you've noticed has improved your workflow from either communication standpoint?
Yeah, I will get into all the different ways that we have accelerated this transition and how we work as a company to give you some inspiration and some food for thought and some takeaways specifically. So I'm going to skim through this next part just so I can I'm just trying to figure, I have 25 minutes or so. Cool.
That was great, Luke. I love the percentages and thinking about how and when to use the different communication methods in such a quantifiable way, just as a comment there. Thank you.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. Well, I certainly, this is making this transition where you learn how to use the different tools and you learn how to kind of optimize the way that you work. The way I think about it is, at a root level, you need some level of motivation to be able to want to make the change. But there's essentially only two ways that I know of as to how you can make this shift. One is that a leader can exercise what's called role power. They can essentially say, we should not hold a meeting for a status update. We should hold a meeting to hang out and get to know each other. That's role power. That's one way of accelerating this, what is essentially habit change. And the second is, we believe that there's a need for tools to help, right? And so a tool that can kind of come alongside you and can help enable this habit change, we think of, that's our role. We think tooling by itself is not enough, but if you have someone who's motivated, who wants to figure this out, who also can help reinforce the expected behavior, that's a recipe for success if you want to make this change. So yeah, let me just quickly run through some quick tips. Some of this will be obvious, some of this won't. But yeah, here are all like my tips. The first is, you should probably block off some time to go for a walk or to get physical activity before you start working, or maybe at lunch or something else. This is pretty self-explanatory, but the basic idea is, when you work where you live, it's easy to stay inside. It's easy for the days to flow together because you're lacking the structure that you used to have. You used to go into the office at a particular time, you used to leave at a particular time, there was dedicated time. In theory, there was dedicated time for lunch breaks. And so when you go remote, you lack all of this structure, you need to recreate it yourself. That's something that takes time to figure out. Because, if we all went to school, the structure was built for us, whether it was elementary school, middle school, high school, college, and even the workplace, there was built-in structure. Now we don't really have as much of it. So you need to figure out a way to create it. One way you can do it is just by going for a walk before you start working. Another structural thing that you can do, and this is a screenshot of Friday, which I'll get into later, is, a lot of people, especially successful people, they have these mental exercises that they do where they're essentially mentally or physically writing in a notebook or writing in a journal and road mapping and thinking about what they need to accomplish. So think of this as it's exercises before and sometimes after you do the work. So there's this idea of I think about the work that I need to do, I prioritize it, I do some pre-work, then I go in, I do the work itself, then at the end I reflect, rinse and repeat over and over again. Well, one way that you can be more successful is by road mapping your day. What do I need to accomplish today? One way you can do that is by centralizing your meetings and your tasks in one place. You could use Google Calendar, Outlook, or you could use a tool like Friday to do it. But the idea is, how can you roadmap your day if you don't know what you're supposed to be working on? And if the work is all over the place, how can you create a battle plan, so to speak? It's all over the place. You're going to forget stuff in one area and not the other. So centralizing your work and allocating your time and chunking. So another tip you could do is create some focused time blocks. So maybe use a tool that helps you block distracting websites, and you carve out time to do focused work, right? I'll talk more about this in a little bit. This is super, super important. Everybody's feeling disconnected. And I recognize that we've been locked up at home. One thing people always say about working remotely or working from anywhere is that it's like, oh man, I miss people. I'm getting cabin fever. I miss the human connection. And I would just postulate or ask the question, do you have to be like, what's the best way of asking this question? Does that need to happen at the office? Or can that happen by getting to know people in your community, getting to know your neighbors, getting involved in a nonprofit or something else? And so a huge tip I have here is you definitely need to seek human connection, but the office doesn't necessarily need to be the source of it. It can be a place, but with so much of our life spent communicating behind a screen, Facebook, Twitter, whatever the next one will be, I think for many, the office is the last place where we find human connection. When that was stripped away, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't talk to anybody. So in a post-pandemic world, people have to be more proactive about getting involved and getting connected. I would imagine we'll see some type of rebirth of like the Elks Club, but for people that are working from anywhere. What other way do you have? You have to find a way to get involved. I think it has the potential to be a net positive. And just to get back to an earlier point I made, you need to create systematic routines to the way that you work, right? Think about the work before you do it. Prioritize the work that you do before you do it. At the end, reflect, how could I have improved? How could I have done this differently? Did I work on the right things? And yes, introspect. So take notes, reflect, and figure out when you're most productive. For me, it's early in the morning. I'm useless late afternoon and the evening. It's not going to happen. Take notes. Say, when am I actually most productive? And let me just, and also clearly don't be too hard on yourself, because there's a massive difference between working remotely during a pandemic and working remotely when a pandemic isn't happening. So for example, I would go to a coffee shop and work a couple hours, a couple times a week, and it was awesome. And that isn't happening right now. And so just know that there's some stuff that will get a lot better. And we're essentially in hard mode right now. This is like expert mode. It's like, how about we just socially isolate you for, a year? It's like, that's not normal. So yeah, don't be too hard on yourself. So yeah, any questions so far before I show you literally how the product can help? I think that is a no. Let me just make sure I have a little bit of time. I'll save some time for Q&A. Yeah, so here's how Friday works. We have built essentially the digital version of walking into to the office and showing up at your desk. So to get back to this idea of show me the most important stuff that I need to accomplish in one place, well, Friday can help with that. So we will pull your meetings and your tasks together. We'll show it in one place. We'll make it easy to jump into those Zoom calls, those Google Hangouts. And so with Friday, you can see your work in one place like you might if you walked in and sat down at your desk. So this is essentially what an individual will see if they sign up for Friday and connect some of their tools. So we integrate with Outlook, Google Calendar, and just about every task management tool you can think of. So we're kind of just gluing the work together in one place. We also have the ability to create some focused time blocks. So some of you may do time blocking exercises in your calendar where you will create that block of time on a particular day. We kind of take that to a little bit of a next level. So you can still create that focused time block, but if you're using a tool like Slack, for example, we can mark you away so that you aren't notified. So for example, if I'm in a meeting, Friday will recognize that I'm in a meeting and I won't get a chat notification in the middle of the meeting, which is incredibly annoying. Additionally, if you want, we can set it up so that we will block distracting websites for you. So when you're in focus time, well, maybe you don't need to check Facebook. Maybe you don't need to read the news. And so it's all about coming alongside of you and saying, what are the best teams? What are individuals that are successful doing? And how can we create a tool to help come alongside you? So yeah, this is how we help you spend more time focusing. We also have this idea of a routine, which is a chance where you can reflect and prioritize on your work. So in Friday, you could kickstart your day. You could reflect on your week or on the end of the day. And I think I have a screenshot here. You can share your work and what you accomplished, almost like you might use like a digital habit journal of sorts. But you can essentially document what you worked on, and you can share that with the rest of your team. So I don't know how many of you have weekly status update meetings or daily check-ins or whatever you want to call them. But what I will almost bet you is some of them are terribly boring because oftentimes half the time you're just going around in a circle sharing what's new and what you're working on. And to get back to a point I made earlier, that's actually a great use for the asynchronous or for the written communication. You don't necessarily need a meeting to share what you're working on. And so what we do in Friday is we help automate routine updates so that you can accelerate your meetings, get to the most important stuff faster, whether it's building relationships, removing the blockers, or talking about strategy instead of just going around in a circle. So we give you something, essentially a report. We'll ping you, we'll ask you, hey, what are you working on? You can share what you're working on. We'll automatically create a report that you can then bring to a meeting so that you can cut out at least the first 15, 20 minutes of a meeting. And oftentimes you find that you don't even need the meeting at all. So at Friday in particular, here's what we do. Monday morning, and keep in mind, we have people across 6 time zones. So if we wanted to hold a meeting, for someone, it could be 10 o'clock at night. Well, I don't want to be the bad guy that pulls them away from hanging out with their family and kids. Like, that's crazy. And so what we do is Monday morning, people roll into the office, so to speak. We just quickly ask, using our tool, hey, how's your weekend? And what do you aim to accomplish this week? So it's part work, part fun. People share photos of what they did over the weekend, like hanging out with family or something else. And then they create this kind of idea of what they aim to accomplish, which gives me what I need as a leader to figure out, are we working on the right things? So we have that. Every day, at the beginning of the day, we just quickly ask, hey, what are you working on today? And do you have anything else you'd like to share? This is a chance where people can just keep each other posted and in the loop. And so all this information is being pushed to different people in the team. And you start building this level of awareness and context that previously you were getting in the office that you're not getting now. And more importantly, this information and the communication is happening on a predictable basis. So think of it almost like plumbing. Email and Microsoft Teams or Slack, that's like creating pipes. It's like laying the pipes in a house. But you need pumps. You need to make sure that the water or the information flows on a repeatable basis. Otherwise, you'll be overwhelmed. There'll be a rush of water in one place and you'll get a trickle in another. And so this is essentially what's happening for a lot of people out there right now. And so, yeah, we also have some other things. So for example, you can see a company directory. So you can quickly see like the goals and the values and the vision of the company, which is especially important if you're onboarding new people who are new to your company and have no idea what your company is all about. Like, how do you bring people up to speed quickly? You can see we have a directory as well. So if I click on someone, I can get to know them. So once again, this is not about replacing hanging out in person or meeting up or jumping on a Zoom call, but it's providing this foundation for accelerating those real-time conversations. So let me just make sure I have time. 10 minutes, great. Think about, I mentioned asynchronous versus synchronous, real time versus my time. It's almost like, imagine like a yin-yang relationship where they complement each other, where each brings, it's almost like each has a specific superpower and each has like an Achilles heel. And when you combine them both together at certain times, you can create a you can dramatically accelerate both. So in this example, if Abby is new to the company, this is just some random fake profile, but if Abby is new to the company and I don't know this person, I could probably go 2 months without really knowing anything about the person. And as a result, I feel kind of like I'm talking to robot, like a robot. It's like, oh, Abby's over here. I don't know who Abby is. Like, I haven't even had lunch with her. I know nothing about this person. And we're communicating in email and Slack and Teams. And like, I don't know anything about her. So I'm going to treat her differently. Not because I'm a bad person, but because I don't really know who they are. And so what we do with these profiles is we're trying to provide this context so that you can remember that they're people and not just a bot or a robot. And more importantly, if you want to quickly strike up a conversation with Abby, you have something that you can just look at quickly to break the ice. This is essentially the digital version of going to the water cooler. So these profiles we're really excited about. Apologies if you can hear a dog barking. That's I have 2 dogs. But yeah, that is essentially the product in a nutshell. We are trying to create like a home for the most important stuff at work. And we are trying to help you create process and predictability to the way that you communicate and share information so that you can have a more flexible work environment so that you can better integrate work and life. So anyway, that's my spiel. I guess maybe we could spend the last few minutes like happy to answer any questions about the company, about how we work, about how it works. Yeah.
I'll kick it off maybe with a interpersonal question first, Luke, if that's
Cool.
all right.
Yeah.
So, and thank you for that. That was spectacular.
Cool. Let
And
me
what a
just
great
make sure.
tool. So, kind of your origin story there.
Mhm.
You go from being a Maine lad, obviously extraordinarily talented. You boomerang back to the state of Maine. I know certainly folks like us, we're thrilled to you're doing kind of the rural remote model pre-COVID.
Mhm.
You start developing this brilliant company here in Maine, launching it in 2019, all about rural remote work, distributed teams, and then COVID hits, and you realize that we're probably going to go through one of the greatest economic experiments in human history, and your company's right there in the middle of it. what are the first couple of things you do operationally wise? What was that moment for you to realize this just went from maybe 3% per US census data in terms of, broadly market segment to, your holy crap moment?
Well, so
Got
I
me
think,
going, what happened?
it's such a good question. So I'll give you a little bit of a timeline and an idea. So I started following COVID in, I would say, middle of February. And so I was kind of watching, like, there's something going on in China. I remember reading in the New York Times, I think, this idea of like this lockdown in some of these major economic centers in China. And one of the things that I remember picking out was that I think usage of Zoom had exploded. I wish I bought some Zoom stock, by the way, but that's a side story. Um, and instantly it pops into my mind is, well, this will probably hit the US at some point. We need to get ready. So I would say I had maybe like a 3-week head start. And we were just aggressively building, getting ready for what we considered to be some inevitability. And at the time I thought, well, like the major cities will shut down, but it'll happen for a couple weeks. That'll be it. So we essentially launched our product in a more public way about call it 2 weeks before most of the US went into lockdown. And so that kind of gave us a little bit of I don't want to call it a head start, but we started getting out in the market just a little bit earlier. When COVID hit, it was like a pretty enormous spike. All of a sudden, like everybody's looking for tools. I would say a lot of people were looking to replicate the office online. Think I was having a meeting, now I need a Zoom meeting. I was having, I was doing whiteboarding in the office. Now I need a digital whiteboard. So those people experience a much bigger hit. Our tool is more focused on kind of after people realize that they can't just keep doing the same thing that they've been doing and that they need to adopt and change their operating model. And so we've seen certainly a sustained spike. What essentially has happened over the past year is big spike, a lot of uncertainty. We went out in the market and tried to see what the fundraising environment was like back then. I think April. Everyone was terrified, so they didn't want to write checks. And so we decided, well, let's just get back to building and let's go back out, in a few months. At the time, I just assumed that everyone thought, yeah, remote work tool, good investment. Not true. And so over the summer in particular, there's kind of this, people started saying, well, this is probably going to stay around for a little bit and we need to think a little differently. So then you saw this interest in remote work tooling. We were able to, start really great conversations with investors, which led to our seed financing. And then at the end, I would say towards the end of last year, there was there was not only another wave, so to speak, but there was also this changing environment in which people are saying, I'll probably go back to the office when this thing is done, at least a couple days a week, but we as a company need to adopt our operating model and assume that this is the default. Instead of assuming that the office can handle all this stuff, we need to create new operating principles, new operating model. We can't rely on the office as much as we could before. And so that is essentially continuing. But it's been such a fascinating time because the market is constantly changing because people are dealing with this unknown that they haven't experienced before. But what I can tell you, the one advantage I feel strongly about is like after years working remotely, it's almost like you can kind of like see around the corner and go. So for example, with more people being vaccinated and as coffee shops open up, have fun getting a seat at the coffee shop. There's these things that are an inevitability. And so fortunately, like I've been able to kind of like think this out a little bit, but it's still an unknown. There's still a huge amount of unknown. So that was essentially how things happened over time.
Thank you so much for that, and certainly peeking around corners for sure. Can you touch on some of your kind of key either resource partners in the state of Maine or mentors? What that's looked like for you, or as well as meant for Friday?
Yeah, so resource partners, there's a few like people definitely and organizations worth mentioning. The first is MTI. So they've been really awesome to work with. When I was working on this as a nights and weekends project, a major reason why Friday exists is because of MPI support. So there's that component. Then there's a component of some angel investors in the community who have invested their dollars into the business. There's an element of I have some mentors in the area. It turns out there's actually some really awesome people that work in tech and work in my line of work. And while they may not all live in Portland, they are. There's a surprising amount of people that have been working remotely for a while, and they are working on pretty cool stuff that I can talk to. So I'm finding out about people all the time there. I entered a couple pitch competitions, and that was helpful practice as well. But those are really the people and organizations that I can think of.
Great, thank you.
So Luke, earlier I asked some of the features that you believed helped your workflow specifically. Do you have a certain feature of Friday that you really enjoy using?
Yeah, so I would say there's kind of a few, but the biggest one is that, so as an individual, I really love being able to block distracting websites and being able to roadmap my day. I always wanted like a digital version of a daily planner. So I find that very interesting as an individual. As a leader of a company, the routines are super, super important. Whether it's a weekly update or a daily stand-up or a Monday kickoff, that helps me feel connected to the team and also makes it so much better because instead of having 5 meetings a week internally, I have like 3 meetings a month internally, and that's only because the information is being shared on a regular basis. And what's really fun about that too is when we share information and updates, we also can just quickly share kudos or thanks to other coworkers. We can answer icebreaker questions, and the profiles I love because it's just a great way to learn more about the people that you work with and just remember like these are people here. Like I'm running a real company, even though like sometimes feels fake. So those are the things that I really find a lot of value in. But I just love that I can spend more of my day not sitting in boring, terrible meetings, but that I can allocate more of my time to talking with customers, doing things like this, and thinking about like what we need to do strategically.
Great, thank you so much.
Cool. Luke, with regards to your seed round, and again, congratulations on that's a nice seed round there at 2.1 million approximately. What's the spend look like on that, and kind of what's your how is that related to your kind of short-term growth plans?
Yeah, I mean, we don't disclose kind of how we spend the money, but what I can tell you is that it gives us a buffer to work on Friday for a couple of years.
And maybe, and to that end, and thank you for that. Where do you, and if you feel comfortable, where do you see Friday within the next 5 years? And if you have an exit strategy and you'd like to share it, would be interested to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, long-term goal, anytime you take investment, the idea is like you become a big and meaningful company that impacts a lot of people. And so what motivates me as a founder is I want to see as many people as possible using this because it legitimately helps make work better. And it helps, it gives me more time so I could like go eat lunch with my son and like better integrate work and life. So I just want this in many people's hands as possible. The goal is certainly to grow, so 5 years, a couple hundred people working for us, really meaningful customers, and then, trying to make an impact, reduce terrible meetings, help people feel connected, help improve communication, and just make work better. Part of the reason why our company is called Friday is we're just trying to make every day feel a little bit more like Friday. People love Friday because it's the end of the week. Well, why can't we just kind of create that attitude for the rest of the week where you're able to do your best work?
Mr. Duguay has his hand up there.
Yeah, Luke, I found this really interesting, and thank you for showing the demonstration because unfortunately I'm not as technology savvy as others, but seeing it really drives home the point of what you're doing here. I'm just curious on the front end of this. How did you come up with like a minimum viable product? Did you have some sort of like a runway of beta testing? How'd you come up with the features that you initially had, or were they not always in there, or did some come in after you interacted?
Yeah, what I can tell you is a lot of what I showed you has been added and adapted over time. The MVP, so to speak, was this idea where every Friday, employees would share how they felt about the week, and that would be shared with a manager. And so it was essentially, imagine like filling out like a survey monkey on a regular basis, and then being able to automatically look at reports and analytics. That was the core product at the time. But since then, we've adapted it so it can handle any type of routine communication or update. We've added goals and the planner and all this other stuff. This suite of tools, so to speak.
Is in the software. I saw on like in your panel it said Todoist, and I found that really exciting because does it allow? Is there a set amount of menu that you can then cross-reference these other tools in the background, or how does that interface work? Is that
So we integrate with a ton of products. So the idea is if another product does something well, we will integrate with them and try to surface it in Friday. So think of it as almost like it's sitting on top of all these other tools that you're using and kind of pulling and gluing the work together, showing you the most important stuff. So for example, if you use Todoist for your to-dos, well, you can see your to-dos when you're sharing what you're working on. If you need a reminder about when to share an update, you could get that as a direct message in Slack or in Microsoft Teams. If you use Microsoft Outlook or Google Calendar, we can pull your meetings in and surface those with your Todoist to-dos. And so we're trying to. The reality is that different people use different tools. So anyway, I realize people
awesome.
have to. Yeah. So that is definitely a part of our strategy.
Cool. Thank you.
Well, unless there are no more questions or comments, just pausing here very briefly.
Garvin, quickly, can we let Luke make a pitch as to how do we check it out further? Is it a subscription? Is it a pay once for a year? Are there different payment plans? Premium, standard?
Yep.
Is that fair? Or?
Yeah, no, I'll give you the quick, long story short. You can try the product for free for you and your team. There's premium functionality that is available on a subscription. You can pay monthly or annually. Team packages are about $6 a month per person. We do offer volume discounts for larger organizations. But yeah, the basic idea is we think you should be able to try the product and use it before you pay.
That's awesome, Luke. Great job. It's awesome.
And to that end, Luke, where can we find you for folks listening maybe at a later date at home?
Yeah, sure. So you can check out our website. It's Friday.app instead of .com, Friday.app. You can shoot me an email if you found that this was useful or if you have other questions. My email is luke@Friday.app. And feel free to sign up for an account and send feedback our way. We're always interested in hearing more about how we can improve.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll be sure to check that out.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you again so much, Luke, for joining us and being a part of our Network Tech Talk. Really looking forward to see how Friday progresses in the future. So thank you very much. I would like to give another shout out to our amazing sponsors who have assisted us with this event. That would be CGI, the Thomas College Harold Alphon Institute for Business Innovation, Valley Beverage, and Bricks Co-working and Innovation Space. So yes, this will be available at a later date on our YouTube channel, and you can also find it on our website, centralmaine.org, at our Tech Night tab. Now, next month, we have a presentation from Kim Dakin of Nugget, who will be showing us how her technology interfaces with Zoom and allows you to save the golden nuggets from your respective conversations that you're having. So thank you so much to everyone who is joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And thank you. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.